So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for having me here with this esteemed panel. Just wanted to say a couple of things as I walk in through the door today. Walking in through here brought me back some memories of 20 years ago when I got off my friend's Pontiac 6000 in my $50 rented suit. And this place was a hotel, and it was my graduation ball from my high school. And this just gave me a really feel of being old all of a sudden. Then we walked down the stairs, and I went to the cafeteria here and just got the $12 turkey sandwich. And I remembered, coming to university, $12 for a turkey sandwich, that sounds very expensive. So all of a sudden, once again, I felt old. And that brings back really to what microgrids are as far as the utility business. The utility business now really feels old when it's looking at the new business models that come in with the microgrid and the new ways of transiting energies and making sure that everything can work together. So what is Hydro-Québec? For those who don't know, for the non-locals, basically we're the Hydro-Québec's grid. We're 4 million customers, give or take a few, 115,000 kilometers of distribution network, 3,000 distribution active lines, and that's mostly on the distribution side. If you're looking on the generation side, you're looking at almost 40,000 megawatts of generation. Pierre-Olivier went into it. All of these guys pretty much scooped my presentation, so that's always the issue of being the last one going. But that being said, we're still a very big utility with a fully renewable source of energy and cheap costs. So microgrids might make us feel old, but making them work within our network becomes a true challenge, and not just technically. So working our way towards microgrid, there's like baby steps. We're doing a Kaizen here, one step at a time, trying to get to the microgrids. I heard about the 2070 grid, and I agree, it's a very good vision down the road, but how do we get to that vision? And when we're looking at the Hydro-Québec, we do have self-generation, net metering options. We're not quite as advanced as some of the other jurisdictions regarding that. For all of the points that Pierre-Olivier mentioned, utilization of energy, cost of energy. So when I'm looking at the net metering and self-generation plans, we're looking at a couple of hundred people within the province on the 4 million customers that have solar panels, micro turbines, or whatever that has to go with it. So we're still very far from what we could call a microgrid, but we're keeping our eyes on the ball at this point. So what's the perspective when we're looking at microgrid? Today's grid, let's just look at distribution. To me, generation is just something I care about, but I'm looking at 100% renewable generation. So I'm not really trying to put generation out of business. I'm not really trying to make it better. So let me look at the grid right now. What is the grid? It's currently designed to limit outages and facilitate resiliency. I do create little microgrids. When I have an outage and my friends here did discuss it, when I have an outage, I'm able to reconnect the grid differently to reduce how big the outage is, to make sure that I do create very local microgrids, but they still have to be fed by centralized generation. Customers at this point can build their own microgrid. By all means, guys, go ahead, build your own microgrids. There are some issues, and they are regulatory issues. When we're talking about the blockchain model, although it makes sense in a technical sense, when I'm looking at the regulatory issues and what has to be faced to be able to do the blockchain model, it becomes regulatory hell until I'm able to get through it. So what is the future? What is HQD looking, and what is the grid of the future? So on the distribution side, and with our friends at the lab, and I've got some friends at the lab, our true microgrid experts are right there. They're smiling, Yves and Mathieu. So when we're looking at the microgrid, basically we're looking at medium voltage microgrid, how we can integrate different customers and sources, and making sure that we have these islanded pockets. Low voltages. So it becomes the blockchain model where you're actually looking at an integrated system operator kind of managing the traffic going of energy from one place to the other in order to improve reliability, resiliency, grid integration, and customer participation. Because either we want it or not, we might have cheap prices, renewable energy, we're great with people. But that being said, people might want just for their own needs and for their own interests, they might still want to build these microgrids, and they still might want to have their own energy independence. So I'm not going to get into the microgrid example. This is very technical. But when I'm looking at the microgrid, really, and what we're testing and what is being done right now at IREC, our research lab, and what we're working with different people, is how do we make sure that the microgrid, and there is a business case on the microgrid where both the utility and the consumer win, both the utility and the consumer survive. It becomes a business case for both of us and not just a hindrance. I'm able to support voltage, power, frequency, all of these other services that people take for granted. But often microgrids will produce a lot of energy, not a lot of power. They'll have all kinds of dips and sags and so on and so forth. And I'm not saying that to be, I know there's solutions around that, but how do you make sure that we both become on a win-win situation on the technical side? How do I make sure, and I think Peter addressed it, the IT and cybersecurity? Some people might think a microgrid is not something interesting to attack. As a hacker, I find it a great thing to attack. I mean, if I want to take a whole neighborhood hostage, what better than to cut the electricity to the neighborhood? What better to start creating spikes in energy in dips and sags and so on and so forth? So when I'm looking at IT security and cybersecurity, it becomes a very big issue that has to be dealt with. Operation with other Hydro-Québec systems, planning and designing microgrids. These are all technical challenges that will have to be faced as we go along, and with our friends and with the microgrids that we are currently developing at our research lab. We're actually thinking of transforming the campus of the research lab into a microgrid, a little bit like what some universities have done, to be able to experiment with this and make sure that we bring the technology forward. This will be, this is something that will help us go forward on this. And finally, what really hurts, and when you're looking at microgrids, is will the regulation be there? And at what point will the regulation be there? Obviously, I always hear the discussion about Uber, you know, and how Uber changed the world, the taxi world, and how Uber, this whole, you know, business model revolutionized everything. And I think it's absolutely right. Uber did change the world, and Airbnb did change the world. And you did have these very strong players that were already in place, the taxi commissions, the hotel chains, and so on and so forth, that were already in place protecting their stake. And you had these technological changes. The issue, however, I see with microgrids and legal and regulatory is I'm really going that step further. I'm really going into a very advanced technology. I'm making sure that I need to address the concerns of people regarding their safety, their quality of service, and making sure down the road that that wood pole with that line still is being maintained and served. Because I don't see anybody in Quebec really wanting to be off-grid, just because of the reasons that when we're looking at people consuming in the winter 150 kilowatt hours a day, and that's not unheard of. That's just a winter peaking day in Montreal. You know, producing that just off 5 or 6 kilowatts of solar panels on your rooftop and a battery might be quite a challenge. So I don't see people actually disconnecting from the grid. So we need to stay there. We need to work with the folks that want to do microgrid, that want to do and go ahead and do these things, and make sure that we have a business model that works for all of us. So finally, I just wanted to address maybe some of the points regarding, I know, François, you mentioned the Magdalen Islands, and there's remote communities that came in as questions, and I know that's always a very interesting question, and I still got 45 seconds so I can address it. So the issue that comes in with these places is they are indeed ideal locations to do microgrids. The Magdalen Islands is an ideal location. We are currently studying either connecting to the grid or adding renewables. The issue often in the, you know, when I'm looking at the Magdalen Islands and some of the others, these other places, the issues aren't as technical as they are sometimes more political and just because of the society that's there. You are looking at some issues on these islands that has to do more on social issues and workforce issues and people, you know, having their livelihood working at the plant. That come in and being an issue much more than technical issues. So when we're looking at microgrids and we're looking down the road to making sure that we increase renewables, the number one issue in these remote communities won't be technical. To me, the technical is something where we can overcome, even though I gave you a whole list of warnings going into the technical side. But it becomes a political and more of a people's consensus issue that needs to be addressed. So that's about it for me. Thank you.